Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we unravel a chilling and shocking tale, a collision of organized crime and the modern push for sustainability. This is the story of the Mafia and Renewable Energy, corruption in the green economy. A tale of power, greed, and betrayal. This case will leave you questioning, how far will criminals go to exploit even the cleanest industries? And what happens when an initiative meant to save the planet becomes a front for dangerous corruption? Stay with us as we uncover the dark secrets behind the Mafia and Renewable Energy, corruption in the green economy. In the pursuit of a greener world, governments around the globe began funding renewable energy projects, solar panels, wind farms, and biofuels, offering billions in subsidies. But beneath the surface of these noble efforts, a sinister force was at play. What if the very organizations claiming to fight for a cleaner future were nothing more than puppets controlled by the Mafia? In the early 2010s, governments around Europe introduced ambitious plans to combat climate change by promoting renewable energy. Generous subsidies were rolled out to support projects like solar farms, wind turbines, and biofuel plants. The initiative was hailed as a transformative step toward a greener future, attracting entrepreneurs and investors eager to capitalize on the shift. However, the influx of funds also drew the attention of criminal organizations looking for new ways to expand their empires. Among them was La Nuova Vita, a powerful mafia syndicate known for adapting to emerging industries. Using front companies and carefully crafted business proposals, La Nuova Vita began infiltrating the renewable energy sector. They portrayed themselves as champions of sustainability, exploiting loopholes in government programs to access millions in subsidies. It was a golden opportunity for them not only to launder money, but also to legitimize their operations under the guise of environmental progress. In the midst of this green revolution, Elena Ricci, a passionate environmentalist with a background in renewable energy advocacy, believed she was on the brink of real change. She joined forces with Victor De Luca, a well-known energy mogul, to launch what seemed to be a groundbreaking initiative focused on large-scale solar farms. De Luca, with his polished demeanor and deep pockets, presented himself as the ideal partner for Elena's vision. Together, they secured significant funding to build renewable energy facilities that promised to revolutionize the industry. For Elena, this partnership was the culmination of years of hard work. She had spent her career championing sustainability and was eager to see her dreams materialize. De Luca, with his connections and resources, seemed to share her passion. The media hailed their collaboration as a beacon of progress, with headlines celebrating their ambitious plans to create Europe's largest network of solar farms. But beneath the surface of their success, something sinister was at play. Unbeknownst to Elena, De Luca wasn't just an energy mogul. He was a high-ranking member of La Nuova Vita. For him, the renewable energy sector wasn't an opportunity to combat climate change, it was a lucrative new frontier for criminal enterprise. As the months passed, cracks in the facade began to appear. Elena noticed delays in construction and unexpected changes to project plans. Certain sites slated for solar farms were repeatedly stalled, yet the subsidies kept rolling in. When she started reviewing financial reports, she found discrepancies that didn't make sense. Funds allocated for equipment and labor seemed to vanish without explanation, while payments to obscure contractors raised red flags. One particular project, the Green Meadows solar plant, became a focal point for Elena's concerns. Initially touted as a flagship endeavor, the project had received millions in subsidies but showed little progress on the ground. When she pressed for answers, she discovered that the land for the plant was owned by a shell company linked to families with long-standing ties to organized crime. This revelation left her shaken. Elena's unease grew as she dug deeper. The clean, green vision she had fought so hard to create began to feel like a mirage. Behind the solar panels and wind turbines was a tangled web of deception, with La Nuova Vita at its center. Every document she uncovered pointed to a larger scheme, one that stretched far beyond her partnership with De Luca. Elena realized she was in over her head. Her dream of driving meaningful change had become entangled in something far more dangerous than she could have imagined. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became that she was facing an organized, well-oiled machine with the power to silence anyone who threatened its operations. Though the world celebrated the rise of renewable energy, Elena now saw the darker side of the industry, one controlled by greed, corruption, and a shadowy force that wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who got in its way. Elena Ricci's initial suspicions about discrepancies in the renewable energy projects turned into a growing sense of dread. The numbers didn't add up, the timelines were far too inconsistent, and the costs for even basic construction were inexplicably inflated. At first, she rationalized these irregularities as the typical complications of large-scale projects. But the deeper she looked, the harder it became to ignore the signs of something more troubling. One discovery in particular shook her. The ownership records for the land where several solar farms were supposed to be built. The parcels of land scattered across rural regions were all connected to entities that, at first glance, appeared legitimate. However, a closer look revealed these entities were shell companies with no identifiable leaders, all linked to families infamous for their ties to La Nuova Vita. It wasn't just a coincidence, it was a calculated effort to funnel government funds into the Mafia's hands. Elena was reluctant to believe what was becoming clear. She had devoted her life to the renewable energy movement, advocating for change in policies and championing sustainable practices. Yet here she was, at the center of a tangled web of corruption. Her partnership with Victor De Luca, which had once seemed like the perfect opportunity to make a difference, now appeared to be a carefully orchestrated trap. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being used, her reputation and passion leveraged to give these fraudulent projects a veneer of legitimacy. Meanwhile, whispers of scandal started to emerge in the broader renewable energy sector. The Green Meadows solar plant, heralded as a transformative project, had failed to deliver on its promises. Despite receiving millions in subsidies, the site remained little more than an empty field. Local workers hired for construction had gone unpaid, and contractors claimed they were unable to procure the necessary materials. It was as if the money had vanished into thin air. Elena began reaching out to colleagues and allies in the industry to gather more information. The more she investigated, the more troubling patterns she uncovered. One of the most alarming cases involved a series of payments to a contractor that didn't even exist. The payments were substantial enough to fund multiple solar farms, but they had been routed through offshore accounts in tax havens like the Cayman Islands. It was a classic money laundering scheme, hidden behind the glossy image of green energy. Meanwhile, whispers about corruption in the renewable energy sector began to spread. As Elena pieced together the clues, a new name entered the picture: Marco Ferri. A former accountant for a different renewable energy company, who had worked on a separate project connected to La Nuova Vita, Ferri had recently turned whistleblower, claiming to have evidence of widespread corruption. He revealed detailed records showing how subsidies were being misused to enrich shadowy organizations. The documents implicated not just La Nuova Vita, but also several high-ranking officials who appeared to be complicit. Ferri's revelations sent shockwaves through the industry, but they also put a target on his back. He went into hiding after his initial disclosures, fearing for his life. Elena, desperate to protect him and learn more, tried to make contact. But before she could, Ferri disappeared. His last known location was a safe house provided by a journalist who had been helping him. When authorities arrived, they found the house ransacked and Ferri's belongings left behind, as if he had been taken in a hurry. The disappearance of Marco Ferri confirmed Elena's worst fears. She wasn't dealing with minor corruption or bureaucratic inefficiency. This was organized crime at its most sophisticated, and it was willing to go to any lengths to protect its interests. The stakes were far higher than she had imagined, and the risks were mounting with every step she took. But there was no turning back now. Elena couldn't ignore what she had uncovered, even as the weight of it pressed down on her. The dream she had fought for was being exploited by criminals, and the very future of renewable energy was at risk. As she prepared to dive even deeper into her investigation, she knew she was stepping into dangerous territory. If Marco Ferri's fate was any indication, the people behind this scheme wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatened to expose them. Elena's determination burned stronger than ever, but with every piece of evidence she uncovered, she felt the walls closing in. She had no idea who she could trust, and every move she made seemed to bring her closer to the people who wanted to silence her. The clean energy movement had become a battleground, and Elena was now at the heart of a fight she hadn't signed up for, one that could cost her everything. The disappearance of Marco Ferri cast a long shadow over Elena Ricci's investigation. She knew she was on the verge of uncovering something far bigger than a few fraudulent projects. But her resources were limited, and the danger was becoming increasingly evident. That's when Sofia Moretti, a well-known investigative journalist, entered the scene. Sofia had built her career exposing corruption at the highest levels, and whispers of irregularities in the renewable energy sector had caught her attention. Sofia began connecting the dots between government subsidies, stalled projects, and the involvement of companies with obscure ownership structures. One name kept surfacing in her research: EcoFuture Inc. The company was registered in Luxembourg and claimed to specialize in wind farm development. On paper, it was a legitimate enterprise, but its operations were riddled with red flags. Projects under its name were consistently over budget, delayed, or never completed, yet millions in subsidies flowed into its accounts. The deeper Sofia dug, the more sinister the story became. EcoFuture Inc. wasn't just inefficient, it was a front. It was tied to Victor De Luca, Elena's business partner, who had positioned himself as a visionary in the green energy movement. Sofia discovered that De Luca had been using EcoFuture Inc. to inflate project costs and divert funds into offshore accounts. Even worse, some of these funds were being used to bribe public officials, ensuring that no one questioned the company's practices. Sofia tracked the money trail to a series of contracts signed by EcoFuture Inc. with suppliers and contractors that didn't exist. These phantom entities were nothing more than bank accounts controlled by La Nuova Vita. But Sofia's most chilling discovery came when she uncovered a direct link between De Luca and Lorenzo the Hammer Vitale, a mafia enforcer known for his brutal methods. Vitale wasn't just an associate, he was deeply involved in managing the criminal enterprise behind the green energy projects. Sofia's investigation wasn't without consequences. One night, as she drove home after a late meeting, her car's brakes failed on a winding mountain road. She narrowly avoided plunging into a ravine, but the message was clear: she was being watched, and her work was putting her life in danger. For a time, she stepped back, shaken but not defeated. While Sofia temporarily retreated, Elena continued her efforts to uncover the truth. She began looking into the contracts Sofia had flagged and noticed an unsettling pattern. Many of the same shell companies appeared across multiple projects, each tied to individuals with connections to La Nuova Vita. Elena's realization was devastating. The green energy initiative she had fought so hard for had become a massive money laundering operation. Elena and Sofia eventually crossed paths, their shared determination to expose the truth bringing them together. They agreed to collaborate, pooling their evidence and resources. But the challenges they faced were monumental. Every lead they followed seemed to bring new risks. Officials who could have been allies were either complicit or too afraid to act. In the midst of their work, Sofia stumbled upon another shocking revelation. One of the largest wind farm projects under EcoFuture Inc. had been approved despite failing multiple environmental and safety assessments. The approvals had been fast-tracked by a government official who was later found to have received large sums of money through offshore accounts. This official, however, had recently resigned and disappeared from the public eye, leaving no trail behind. The more they uncovered, the more Elena and Sofia realized just how far-reaching the corruption was. This wasn't just about a few fraudulent projects or embezzled subsidies. It was a systemic manipulation of the renewable energy sector. Legitimate companies were being edged out, and billions intended for sustainable development were being funneled into criminal enterprises. The danger wasn't hypothetical anymore. Sofia's near-death experience and Marco Ferri's disappearance were stark reminders of what was at stake. Elena began receiving anonymous threats, warning her to stop her investigation. Her movements were being tracked, and she noticed unfamiliar cars parked near her home. The sense of unease grew with each passing day. Despite the risks, the two women pressed on. They knew they were close to something explosive, something that could dismantle La Nuova Vita's grip on the green economy. But the closer they got, the more they felt the weight of the forces working against them. Every piece of evidence they uncovered brought them one step closer to the truth, and one step closer to danger they could no longer ignore. Elena Ricci and Sofia Moretti knew they were running out of time. Their investigation had unearthed shocking evidence of a vast network of corruption, implicating high-profile politicians, corporations, and La Nuova Vita. But the more progress they made, the closer they came to the point of no return. The forces working against them were growing more aggressive, and it became clear that their lives were in imminent danger. Sofia decided to take a calculated risk. She reached out to an old contact in law enforcement, Detective Luca Marinelli. Known for his unrelenting pursuit of justice, Marinelli had spent years investigating organized crime and had even crossed paths with La Nuova Vita in previous cases. However, those investigations had always been stonewalled by lack of evidence or interference from corrupt officials. Sofia believed that the evidence she and Elena had gathered could give Marinelli the ammunition he needed to finally take action. When Marinelli reviewed the documents, he was stunned by the scale of the operation. The renewable energy sector, once heralded as a beacon of hope, had become a front for one of the largest money laundering schemes in Europe. Subsidies intended to combat climate change had been siphoned off into offshore accounts, financing everything from luxury properties to illegal arms deals. Even more disturbing were the connections to high-ranking government officials, some of whom were directly involved in approving fraudulent contracts. Marinelli promised to help but warned that the stakes were higher than they could imagine. He explained that La Nuova Vita wasn't just a criminal syndicate, it was a deeply entrenched organization with influence over law enforcement, politics, and the media. Taking them down would require airtight evidence and a carefully executed plan. One misstep could result in the entire case collapsing or worse, retaliation that would cost them their lives. As they worked with Marinelli, Elena and Sofia uncovered another layer of the conspiracy. Several renewable energy projects linked to Ecofuture Inc. had been deliberately designed to fail. These projects, labeled as zombie farms, existed only on paper. The land allocated for them was unsuitable for development, and the equipment listed in reports didn't exist. The projects were merely a means to extract subsidies and channel the money into illegal ventures. One of these zombie farms, located in southern Italy, caught their attention. Officially, it was a sprawling solar plant with state-of-the-art technology. In reality, it was an abandoned field surrounded by rusting fences. Elena traveled there under the guise of conducting an inspection and found no signs of construction, only a few scattered pieces of equipment that appeared to have been staged for photos. It was the final confirmation she needed to prove the fraud. But Elena's visit didn't go unnoticed. A local informant tipped off La Nuova Vita about her presence, and within hours she realized she was being followed. A black SUV trailed her as she drove back to her hotel, and when she arrived, she noticed two men loitering in the lobby, watching her every move. Fear gripped her, but she managed to slip out through a side entrance and call Sofia, who arranged for her to leave the area immediately. Meanwhile, Marinelli began building a case against Victor De Luca and his associates. Using the evidence provided by Elena and Sofia, he secured warrants to investigate several shell companies and offshore accounts. The process was slow and meticulous, as even a minor error could alert the suspects and jeopardize the entire operation. Marinelli's superiors were hesitant to support the investigation, fearing political backlash, but he pressed on, determined to see it through. Tensions escalated when Marinelli discovered that someone within his own department was leaking information to La Nuova Vita. Every move they made seemed to be anticipated, and key witnesses who could have testified against De Luca began disappearing. One contractor, who had agreed to speak about the fraudulent projects, was found dead in what appeared to be a car accident. Another was reported missing, his house ransacked, and his family terrified to speak out. Sofia and Elena realized they couldn't rely solely on the legal system to expose the truth. They decided to take their findings public, crafting a detailed expose that would leave no room for denial. Sofia reached out to international media outlets, ensuring that the story would gain traction even if local authorities tried to suppress it. They knew this was a gamble. Once the story broke, they would become targets, but it was their only chance to shine a light on the corruption and force action. As the deadline for the expose approached, the threats against them intensified. Elena received an anonymous package containing photos of her family, accompanied by a chilling note. Sofia's apartment was broken into, her files scattered and her computer destroyed. Marinelli, too, found himself under scrutiny, with rumors of misconduct suddenly surfacing in an attempt to discredit him. Despite the mounting pressure, they pushed forward, knowing that the truth was their only weapon. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown. Elena, Sofia, and Marinelli were about to expose one of the most audacious criminal enterprises in modern history. But they also understood that once the story went public, there would be no going back. The walls were closing in, and their next move would determine whether justice would prevail or whether they would become the next victims of La Nuova Vita's ruthless agenda. As the deadline for the expos loomed, the tension surrounding Elena Ricci, Sofia Moretti, and Detective Luca Marinelli reached a breaking point. Their investigation had revealed a web of corruption so intricate that it was almost impossible to tell where the legitimate efforts in renewable energy ended and the criminal enterprise began. Every step closer to the truth seemed to deepen the danger, but they were determined to finish what they had started. Sofia finalized her report, a meticulous expose that pieced together years of financial records, whistleblower testimonies, and photographic evidence of abandoned zombie farms. The article painted a damning picture of how La Nuova Vita had infiltrated the renewable energy sector, exploiting government subsidies and laundering money through shell companies and fraudulent projects. Victor De Luca was identified as the linchpin, coordinating the operation under the guise of an environmentally conscious entrepreneur. The report was ready for publication, and Sofia had arranged for its release through multiple international outlets to prevent any single entity from suppressing it. While Sofia worked on the report, Marinelli coordinated a raid targeting properties and accounts linked to La Nuova Vita. He knew that timing was critical. If the expose went live before the raids, the suspects might destroy evidence or flee. The operation was meticulously planned, involving a small team of trusted officers to minimize the risk of leaks. They targeted Infiltration Inc.'s offices, De Luca's private estate, and several shell company addresses tied to offshore accounts. It was a race against the clock, with everything hanging in the balance. On the day of the raid, Elena and Sofia stayed hidden in a safe house provided by Marinelli. Their phones buzzed with updates from reporters and allies, each one bringing a mix of hope and anxiety. As the first reports of the raid hit the news, the world began to take notice. Social media erupted with outrage as details from Sofia's expose circulated, shedding light on the extent of the corruption. People demanded accountability, calling for justice not only against La Nuova Vita but also the government officials who had enabled them. The raid was successful in some respects. Marinelli's team recovered critical documents from Infiltration Inc.'s offices, including falsified contracts and evidence of bribes paid to politicians. At De Luca's estate, they found encrypted hard drives and bank statements linking him to offshore accounts. However, the operation wasn't without setbacks. Several key suspects, including De Luca himself, had vanished before the raids began. It was clear that someone had tipped them off. Despite the partial success, the raid sent a clear message. The conspiracy was no longer hidden in the shadows. Public pressure mounted as more details emerged, and international organizations called for an independent investigation into the misuse of renewable energy funds. For the first time, it seemed possible that justice might prevail, even if the key players were still at large. But the victory was short-lived. Days after the expose was published, Elena received another threat, this time more personal than anything she had encountered before. A package arrived at the safe house containing a burned fragment of a solar panel and a note warning her that even the sun cannot protect you. Sofia, too, found herself under constant surveillance, with unmarked cars parked near her home and anonymous calls flooding her phone. Marinelli faced his own battles. His superiors, embarrassed by the scandal's exposure, questioned his methods and attempted to shift blame. Rumors swirled about his professional conduct, with accusations clearly designed to undermine his credibility. Despite the mounting obstacles, he refused to back down, using the evidence from the raid to continue building his case against La Nuova Vita. He knew that the fight was far from over. The turning point came when an unexpected ally emerged. A disgruntled insider from La Nuova Vita, fearing for their own safety, reached out to Marinelli with critical information. The insider provided access to encrypted files containing detailed records of the Mafia's operations within the renewable energy sector. These files revealed the full extent of the scheme, including names of high-ranking officials, corporate collaborators, and even the identities of those responsible for silencing whistleblowers like Marco Ferri. Armed with this new evidence, Marinelli launched a renewed push for arrests and prosecutions. International law enforcement agencies got involved, targeting La Nuova Vita's offshore accounts and cutting off their financial lifelines. Slowly but surely, the empire they had built began to crumble. For Elena and Sofia, the battle took a heavy toll. Both were forced to remain in hiding as the mafia sought revenge for their role in exposing the conspiracy. Yet, despite the personal sacrifices, they found solace in knowing that their work had made a difference. The expose had sparked a global conversation about accountability in the renewable energy sector, leading to reforms that closed loopholes and strengthened oversight. Months later, headlines announced the arrest of Victor De Luca in a remote villa in Montenegro. His capture marked a symbolic victory, though much work remained to dismantle the remnants of La Nuova Vita's operations. Elena, Sofia, and Marinelli watched the news from their respective safe locations, knowing that their fight had changed the course of an industry and struck a blow against one of Europe's most powerful criminal syndicates. The green energy movement, once tainted by corruption, began to rebuild its credibility. But for those who had risked everything to expose the truth, the scars of the battle remained. They had faced a powerful enemy and survived, proving that even in the darkest corners of society, justice could prevail. Still, they knew the war wasn't over. Corruption had been exposed, but its roots ran deep and the fight to protect what they believed in was far from finished. Thank you for watching Mystery Minds. The story of the Mafia and Renewable Energy reminds us that greed can seep into even the cleanest industries, leaving destruction in its wake. If you found this case as gripping as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And as always, stay curious, stay vigilant, and join us next time as we uncover another dark mystery. Until then, keep questioning the world around you.